You kissed your baby this morning, watched them sleep, peacefully, gently ran your fingers through their hair. That was love. That was instinct. Sparta called both a liability. Your newborn didn't belong to you. It belonged to the city. The city decided if it lived. But here's what nobody tells you about that system. The part everyone skips rewrites the entire story. And the rewrite goes somewhere far darker than you expect. Plutarch recorded the procedure in the 2nd century AD in his Life of Lycurgus. When a baby was born, the father didn't hold it first. He carried it to the Lesche, a stone chamber where Sparta's elders assembled and waited. The council was ready. One elder pressed the spine. Another tested the legs. A third watched the breathing. If the baby passed, the child lived. But if anything failed, the apothetes. The apothetes was a ravine carved into the base of Mount Taygetos, and the babies carried there never returned. And Sparta didn't bury this in shame, but it didn't whisper about it in private either. It stated it plainly, as the natural obligation of a city built to endure. Aristotle documented the same logic 4 centuries earlier in his Politics. He wrote without horror, without outrage. Let there be a law that no deformed child shall be reared. Not a scandal, a statute. The distance between those two framings is the exact distance between us and them. Now something is forming inside you. Did this actually happen? Or is this a myth historians stretched over centuries? The answer to that question leads somewhere entirely unexpected, but it requires a digger, a mountain, and a pile of bones that weren't what the digger came to find. In 2002, Greek archaeologist Theodoros Spyropoulos launched a full excavation at the base of Mount Taygetos. He spent years at that site. His hypothesis was direct. Thousands of infant bones waited beneath the soil. Physical confirmation of the most deliberate selection system in recorded history. What he uncovered was different. The remains were predominantly young adult males. Infant bones represented a fraction far too small to match the systematic practice the historical text described. This changes what exactly? Everything, because historians now argue this. Sparta's real engineering didn't begin at the birth examination. It began earlier. It cut deeper. Sparta wasn't only removing weak infants after birth. It was designing conditions so that weak infants never arrived at all. That sounds like a minor distinction. But that distinction explains the entire machine. Spartan women were the most physically trained women in the ancient world. They ran. They wrestled. They threw the discus and the javelin. In Athens, in Corinth, in Thebes, women lived locked inside houses from childhood. In Sparta, women drilled on the same training grounds as men. But this wasn't equality. This was output engineering. Sparta's operating logic was absolute. A powerful mother delivers a powerful child. They intercepted weakness before it was born. But that was only the first half of the system. And the second half is where everything turns strange. Once a Spartan child survived the council's judgment, the state didn't retreat. It advanced. At exactly 7 years old, the city took the child from its family. No ceremony marked that morning. No time existed for goodbyes. The agoge began. Agoge means upbringing in Greek. But that word doesn't belong to that room. The agoge was an identity deletion. Dismantle the old self. Install a replacement. Not a person. Not a citizen. A war machine. Children received insufficient food by design. Hunger wasn't a side effect. Hunger was the method. They stole what they needed to survive. If an elder caught them in the act, a beating followed immediately. Not for stealing, but for being caught. The system punished getting caught. Not the theft. They trained in weather they weren't dressed for. They slept on reed mats they cut themselves from the riverbank. The cold, the hunger, the exhaustion. Not obstacles, the curriculum. At 17, the system escalated. The Cryptia began. The city sent a young Spartan alone into the countryside, armed with only a blade. For months, he would survive in the wilderness, doing whatever the dark required. And if the opportunity arose, the system expected him to take the life of a helot, one of the enslaved workers who grew Sparta's food. But this wasn't just a survival test. This was a final identity audit. The question the system asked in silence: is there anything left in you that resists? Stop here. Because what comes next fractures the frame you've been building, and the fracture runs in a direction you haven't seen yet. Spartan mothers sent sons to battle with one sentence. Either with this shield or on it. Return triumphant, or come back having given your last breath for the city. No third option. By Spartan measure, this wasn't cruelty. This was devotion. The only dialect of love the system had preserved. But here is where the deepest question anchors itself. Can a system constructed entirely around suffering still build love? At Sparta's height, the full citizen population never exceeded 9,000 people. 9,000. With that, they halted Athens. With that, they held the Persian Empire at Thermopylae. With that, they sustained the longest unbroken military dominance in the ancient world. No advantage in numbers. No secret technology. Just human design applied without mercy for 2 centuries. Herodotus recorded what Persian advance scouts reported before Thermopylae. Spartan soldiers combing their hair, resting, laughing quietly. 300 men preparing to face 200,000, and they were calm. The Agoge had built exactly that. Men who treated falling in battle as an acceptable outcome because the system had trained them to do so since age 7. But in those 250 years of dominance, something remarkable never appeared. No Spartan philosopher wrote, no Spartan playwright composed, no Spartan architect built for beauty. The system produced soldiers with absolute precision. But curiosity, invention, and dissent require a kind of thinking the Agoge burned out of children before they reached 10. The machine's perfection was also its blind spot, and that blind spot had a name, and a date, and a field. 371 BC, the plain of Leuctra. The Spartan army met the Theban general Epaminondas. Xenophon recorded the advance. The Spartans moved in standard formation exactly as they always had. The machine breathed the way it always breathed. The lines held the way they always held. And for the first time in 4 centuries, those lines broke. Why? Epaminondas concentrated his strongest forces on the left flank, while deliberately thinning the right. Asymmetry. Sparta had never encountered it. The system had built no response to it. Not because Spartan soldiers lacked courage, because the system never trained them to face the unfamiliar. It trained resistance to known suffering. It trained nothing else. This is the twist buried inside the entire history. Sparta didn't collapse because it was cruel, collapsed because it was consistent. It built the same soldier for 250 years. The same cold, the same hunger, the same obedience, the same silence. And then one commander tried something new, and the machine held no instruction for new. It adapted to nothing, invented nothing, questioned nothing. Sparta wanted the perfect baby. It built the perfect soldier. It could not build a person capable of surprise. And that single gap, that quiet, invisible gap, swallowed 4 centuries in a single afternoon. Go back now, to that father. The man standing inside the Lesche, holding his newborn, out over the stone table, watching the elders. What did he feel? No Spartan wrote it down. No tablet kept it. No poem preserved it. Maybe the thought never formed. Maybe the system had already extracted that kind of feeling, the way the Agoge extracted softness from boys, the way it removed weak bodies from the population, the way it removed hesitation from the soldiers, the way it removed curiosity from children before they understood what curiosity was. The system filtered feelings too, quietly, completely, without ceremony. Sparta chose strength. It lost flexibility, curiosity, doubt, and mercy. Athens chose curiosity. Fewer victories won, but Socrates, Plato, Aristotle came. And we still ask their questions today. Not Sparta's. Every society makes this selection. Not which babies survive, which values survive. We make it too. Every day, every law, every silence we allow to stand. You kissed your baby this morning. That father in the Lesche kissed nothing. The engineers had already arrived.